The ceasefire is holding. It's up to Hamas now to release the hostages. After 2 years of war in Gaza, the Donald Trump brokered peace plan has entered its first phase. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. Thousands of Palestinians returned to what's left of their homes in Gaza City yesterday, hours after an Israeli ceasefire kicked in. It's the first step in a peace plan driven by Donald Trump. The next step is for Hamas to release the remaining hostages who've been held for the past 2 years. That's expected to happen by tomorrow night, Australian time. World leaders are celebrating this moment, cautiously hoping it will lead to lasting peace, while acknowledging there are still difficult issues that remain unresolved.
Anything we should know about the Middle East?
In a significant breakthrough,
Donald Trump's news conference was interrupted.
A diplomatic drama live on television.
I was just given a note by the Secretary of State saying that we're very close to a deal in the Middle East.
Israel and Hamas have agreed
to the first phase of a peace plan.
An announcement 2025 via Truth Social from the US President Donald Trump.
What's been agreed?
The remaining hostages will finally be released.
The hostages will come back. They're all coming back on Monday.
And Israeli troops withdrawn.
On the ground, aid trucks also ready to move in.
I said Israel cannot fight the world, baby. They can't fight the world.
The hardliners fell into line.
We couldn't have achieved it without the extraordinary help of President Trump and his team.
وإننا نعلن اليوم التوصل لاتفاق لإنهاء الحرب والعدوان على شعبنا.
He's cemented his status as the peace president.
And I think it will go down as a historic moment.
Celebrations have erupted in the Middle East.
World leaders, including Anthony Albanese, welcome these major developments.
The past 2 years have been full of dark days. Today we see a ray of light.
A really important step that's been reached here.
Ici à féliciter le président Trump pour son engagement personnel.
This shows why Australia must always stand with our closest ally, the United States.
Let's face it, while our Prime Minister was off virtue signalling at the UN about Palestinian statehood,
our recognition was part of, contributed to that momentum.
Donald Trump was out there actually brokering a deal.
The opposition has been out of step with the international community for a very long time.
What is your view now on a two-state solution?
I don't have a view. I'm going to go with what they agreed to.
The European Union stands ready.
The UK stand ready.
Attention is turning to how Australia might help.
We'll talk, obviously, with partners. These are early days, and this is a fragile situation.
Thousands of Palestinians in Gaza are heading back to their homes on foot. And as for Hamas, it now has until Monday
to release the Israeli hostages.
They're getting them now. They're getting them now. We're going to create something where people can live. You can't live right now in Gaza.
Coming up, we'll look at the Optus 000 outage with my guest, the Shadow Minister for Communications, Melissa McIntosh. First, let's check what's making news. In the 9 newspapers, Paul Sakkal has further details of the government's efforts to build a critical minerals stockpile, with a range of incentives for miners being considered. It comes ahead of the Prime Minister's meeting with Donald Trump in just over a week, where Australia plans to offer the US a deal on access to critical minerals. News Corp papers report Optus has won $900 million worth of government contracts since its 000 outage nearly 2 years ago. Former competition watchdog chair Alan Fells is calling for a review of the contracts in light of another outage last month linked to 3 deaths. And in Gaza, US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and White House advisor Jared Kushner have entered the Gaza Strip, according to video released by the Israeli army. They were seen being briefed by officers, and then later in Tel Aviv they addressed a crowd of Israelis in Hostage Square who roundly booed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Let's get the very latest now from Israel and Washington with the ABC's Middle East correspondent Matt Doran and America's editor John Lyons. I spoke to them both a short time ago. Matt, let me come to you first. Almost immediately after we saw the ceasefire take effect, we saw this column of Palestinians returning to Gaza City. What exactly are they returning to?
David, good morning. They are returning to scenes of utter devastation. This is an area, Gaza City, which has been absolutely pummeled in recent weeks as Israel had launched that campaign to take control and occupy the area, saying it was one of the last strongholds of Hamas. We saw major apartment buildings in Gaza City being levelled in the last couple of weeks or so, and that was after many people had already fled the area. Hundreds of thousands who'd been living in Gaza City, not all of them from Gaza City, many seeking shelter there, having been displaced from other parts of the Strip. They were forced to flee once more. So the moment that ceasefire came into force, there were really incredible scenes of just an endless stream of people returning to those areas, and in some cases finding that their homes or where they had been sheltering had been reduced to rubble. We have heard from emergency services in Gaza that dozens of bodies have been retrieved in the last short while, with crews able to get into those sites now that ceasefire is in force and that Israel has ceded some of that ground as it starts to pull back to the lines that it's agreed to allow the hostage releases to begin in the next short while.
And if Israel is keeping its end of the deal so far, we now await the release of hostages by Hamas. What can you tell us about the preparations for the hostage release?
Well, David, there is still a little bit of confusion as to exactly when this will happen. We are within this 72-hour window during which time those Israeli hostages do need to be freed. 48 of them still captive in Gaza, 20 believed to be alive. There is some conjecture as to whether or not those hostage releases could begin earlier than that 72-hour deadline. That deadline is midday local time here in the Middle East, which equates to around 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time on Monday night. What we are expecting is that the remaining living hostages, they will be freed. The remaining dead hostages, their remains, that could take a little bit longer for that to happen, for those remains to be returned to Israel, because Hamas has already said it is having trouble locating some of those remains throughout the Strip. And many of the families, including some that we've spoken to in the last couple of days or so, are anxiously awaiting the return of their loved ones. They, of course, have been looking forward to this day for 2 years now, but some of them are also not wanting to get ahead of themselves. They won't believe that this is actually the case until they finally embrace those hostages after more than 730 days in captivity.
John Lyons, let me come to you in Washington. We've seen ceasefires before, but there is more hope around this one turning into a lasting peace. Is that largely because of the man who resides in that building behind you?
That's right, David. It's the Trump effect has certainly been crucial and different in this. There's no doubt that within Israel that some members of the far right of the cabinet wanted Benjamin Netanyahu to continue this war. There were two key moments that led Donald Trump to this journey to where he is now. And credit to him for stopping the bombing. Whatever else people can say about America's role in this war of supplying the bombs, because of Donald Trump's intervention, those bombs will stop being dropped and those hostages will come out sooner than otherwise. The two key moments were recently at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. On the sidelines of that, Donald Trump held a meeting with the leaders, a lot of the Islamic and Arab countries, the leaders from Egypt, Indonesia, Jordan, Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, United Arab Emirates. And apparently it was an extraordinary meeting where those leaders sat around with Donald Trump, and he is persuadable. He does listen to the last person he spoke to, and those leaders said to him, you cannot allow Israel to annex the West Bank. You cannot allow Israel to force the Palestinians out of Gaza. The whole Riviera plan could not go on, of course, which was to essentially to develop essentially an empty Gaza. And that was a crucial moment for him. Donald Trump's talked about that. And then the second moment came the Monday after that meeting here at the Oval Office when Benjamin Netanyahu met Donald Trump. Donald Trump, according to a lot of the American and Israeli media, handed Benjamin Netanyahu a form of words and said to him, you will call the Prime Minister of Qatar and you will apologise for the bombing of Doha recently, which of course Israel said it was trying to kill some Hamas leaders. Didn't, killed a Qatari instead. And Donald Trump handed him this form of words and rang the Prime Minister of Qatar from here in the Oval Office. Extraordinary phone call. Benjamin Netanyahu, Donald Trump in the one room, the Prime Minister of Qatar on the phone, and Benjamin Netanyahu apologised. And as a result of the anger of Donald Trump over Qatar, reports are that he said to Benjamin Netanyahu, enough is enough, the war is stopping.
And John, you have watched this conflict over many, many years. What are going to be the most difficult steps now to move beyond just a ceasefire to some sort of peace?
Well, in a strange way, the exchange of the hostages for the prisoners is sort of the easiest, if you like, part of this process. The next bit, the rebuilding of Gaza, 2.1 million people. The media haven't been allowed in the foreign media. I think until the foreign media go in there, we won't know the true horrors of what Israel has done in Gaza with the bombing over the last 2 years, and the rebuilding, moving towards a Palestinian state, stopping Gaza descending into civil war with clans and different factions fighting each other, stabilising it and trying to move towards a longer-term sustainable Palestinian state. That's the challenge.
John Lyons and Matt Doran, really appreciate you both of you joining us. Thanks so much. And don't miss John's Four Corners piece, which goes to air tomorrow night on the ABC. That's in relation to Donald Trump. Let's bring in our panel now. We're joined this week by Paul Sakkal, Clarke and Waleed Aly. Very good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
Just to pick up on this conversation before we get to how the political debate here is, where it's gone since this ceasefire took hold. Paul, this question of Israel and Hamas agreeing to the deal at all, I mean, it's not that long ago that this was unthinkable. They were refusing to give an inch either side. Why now?
Yeah, well, a lot of factors coinciding, and chiefly Trump's brute force. I mean, the US president is causing chaos in some respects across the world. Alliances with the US are fraying, but this week has demonstrated that there is still awesome power in the presidency of the United States. The Qatar bombing was a key moment, as John Lyons outlined. It was seen as the moment that the switch flicked in his mind. It was the first point at which he started putting real pressure on the Israelis. He has unique leverage over Benjamin Netanyahu because Netanyahu has always appealed to the Zionist elements of the Republican Party. But if you lose Trump, there is nowhere else to appeal on the right. If you lose Trump, you lose the US.
And that's an interesting point because he does, Mel, seem to have applied more pressure than Joe Biden did.
And I think Joe Biden faced a lot of criticism for his very strong support for Israel right through his presidency. But I think there are quite a few factors here that have aligned that have made this moment possible. Obviously, the Qatar bombing is a clear one, as is the unity of Arab and Muslim voices speaking at this point that John talked about as well. But there's also the fact that the MAGA base has no interest in the US being involved in a war that they might see as a forever war, and the fact that the US is providing support to Israel is something that MAGA supporters have been raising frustrations about.
So there's he campaigned on this, right? He campaigned on ending this war and other wars.
So there's domestic pressure there. There's been quite a bit of emphasis put on the fact that the plan that has been put now is Trump's plan rather than a rejigged version of Biden's plan. So he sees a sense of ownership in it. There's also the extent to which he continues or seems now not to believe anymore the Netanyahu and Ron Dormer position that a military campaign can deliver a return of hostages, and he no longer believes that position that he seems to have believed that was put to him as well. So I think there's quite a few things that have lined up to get to this moment that we've seen now.
Yeah, and look, the Trump role is undeniable. Everybody's recognising that, and I think that's an interesting point too, that while most Republicans are still very pro-Israeli, there is that strain in the MAGA base that's not as wedded to being so pro-Israeli. But the role of the Arab states here too, Waleed, is pivotal in really shifting to a much harder position against Hamas.
Yes, but also against Israel. Now, that might seem like a weird thing to say, but this is one of the things that the Israeli bombing of Doha did, was it changed the calculation amongst some of the Gulf Arab states particularly, that the biggest regional threat to stability was not Iran anymore, but was Israel.
Interesting.
And when that calculation shifted, you see, it's easy to forget. There are huge tensions across the region, chiefly between nations like Iran and Saudi Arabia over regional hegemony, right? So if they make the calculation that actually we're not so worried about Iran anymore, but we're becoming a bit more worried about Israel, that changes the united front that they can then put to the US, and it changes the demands that they can make, and that seems to be what happened. So all of these are slight, you know, everyone said many factors at once. That is true. I don't think it's fair, or I don't think it's right to say, oh, Donald Trump came along and waved his magic Trump wand and everything got fixed. Trump was crucial, but all sorts of things happened. Jared Kushner's role in this we haven't raised that yet. Huge element of it. And one of the things that makes him important in this, apart from his negotiation style and all of that, is he has serious business interests in the Middle East, in these Arab nations.
This is what I've heard some former Israeli diplomats to the US say this week is, do not underestimate how much influence rich Gulf countries have over Donald Trump.
Yeah, so there's a simpatico relationship there that probably doesn't exist with other presidents. The Jared Kushner business deals are part of it. Ironically, because he's acting as a volunteer, he doesn't have to declare his interest. So all these things that we would normally think of as being the total opposite of the way that good governance and democratic governance work may have in this very particular situation
and there
have helped lead to the ceasefire.
Paradoxes everywhere here. I mean, for all the people who are making the argument that Trump has pulled down Benjamin Netanyahu's pants and just forced him into this, you look at the history of the last few months, there was a ceasefire agreement when Trump actually assumed office. Netanyahu got rid of it. Trump didn't do a thing when the hunger crisis was occurring. He could have done this all months ago and saved lots of trauma. Benjamin Netanyahu is also facing hugely difficult domestic circumstances. He's got an election in a year's time. He needs an off-ramp from this war as well. There's a question about whether he can keep his right-wing coalition together if he pushes forward with this deal. It's unclear if Hamas will retain power in their area, so Benjamin Netanyahu might still go in again, but there are all these other domestic factors that led to this too.
And all those uncertainties about will Hamas really give up power? What role will it continue to play? How quickly and far will Israel withdraw from Gaza? And that's going to be a domestic political...
Hamas has said it's out of the question that they'll disarm just today.
There you go.
And so therefore this is a ceasefire agreement, the best one we've had so far, which should be applauded, but it's not a plan for everlasting peace yet.
I want to look at the debate here in Australia because very quickly that fault line emerged over whether it was helpful or not to formally recognise Palestinian statehood. The Foreign Minister Penny Wong was arguing that it did contribute.
Our recognition was contributed with others to that momentum. The opposition has been out of step with the international community for a very long time.
The opposition and the former Deputy Liberal leader Josh Frydenberg said this was an offensive suggestion that Australia contributed at all to this. Mel, what do you think? Who's right, who's wrong?
Look, the government will argue, and I've heard plenty of this from cabinet ministers and people in high office through the course of the last couple of days, but we also heard Anthony Albanese say this just the other day, that they will point to the statement that Donald Trump made to Benjamin Netanyahu, where he's reported to have said, "You can't fight the world, Bibi, you can't fight the world." And they point to that statement as an example of the international pressure was a factor. Now, they're not trying to claim it was the thing that turned it, but they're saying it's a factor. The opposition is arguing the Trump wand, effectively. The statement we've had from Michaelia Cash, the opposition foreign affairs spokesman, is this was all Trump, all credit to Trump. The government isn't on board. The government has a split with Trump, and therefore they cannot claim any credit. I mean, I think that's lacking a lot of nuance. And we can go into that, but that's effectively where the division lies between the government and the opposition.
What do you think? Because Mel's right, there are two very different views on this, and it's not like, it's clear up in lights this was a factor that contributed. But the argument from the government is that the Arab states, in reaching the point they did, were helped along by this Western bloc of UK, Canada, France, Australia and others recognising Palestine without Hamas being part of the governing future of the place. And that the pressure on Israel was also there from this move as well. What do you think?
So international pressure clearly played some sort of role. I think when Trump is talking about you not being able to fight the world, he's referring to the fact that, that scene where Netanyahu is speaking at the UN and everyone leaves, that's a very powerful image. There are all these sorts of elements that contributed to Israel's isolation. Sometimes, frankly, I think Australia is too busy trying to attach itself to a big global story to say, oh, we did this and we did that. Actually,
but it wasn't just Australia.
No, exactly, and that's the point. And the Arab nations swinging was a very significant element of it. So all of that. Yes, international pressure is important and the international isolation, but really in the end, it had to come to a situation where Benjamin Netanyahu for himself had realised that his isolation was no longer something he could afford to ignore, and he had to accept it. And without the attack in Qatar, I don't think any of that happens.
It does seem to be a bigger factor, but nonetheless, the debate here, Paul, what do you think about this argument over whether Australia, along with others, recognising Palestine helped or not?
I think it's questionable whether the government should have lent into this as much as they did this week to keep suggesting that they played a role. It is in, I think, contradiction with Albanese's line for the best part of 2 years now that Australia's not a central player. So I know they haven't claimed full credit for it, but given the alienation of the Australian Jewish community, I do wonder whether they should have even tried to make this argument this week. They should have just, I think, easier to just applaud the good outcome. I note as well the effusive praise from people like Penny Wong towards the President this week. I think her words were, he upends the playbook and gets results. Reminded me a bit of the comment that Peter Dutton made before the last election, which was heavily criticised, where he said, big thinker and deal maker. Right. Only issue was Peter Dutton made that comment when Trump put forward his ludicrous Riviera plan, and Dutton was also aping Trump in ways, so it hit different. But
also, he said that just on the eve of Liberation Day, where all the tariffs. Now, this could be a comment that ends up on the eve of a ceasefire deal falling apart and utter devastation. We don't know.
No,
sometimes
let's
these
hope
things
not.
are judged.
But the praise from the government here of Donald Trump was quite striking. Trump himself missed out on the Nobel Peace Prize the other day. It went to Venezuela's Maria Corina Machado. She's been working to defy the dictatorship in her country.
She wanted to give it to him, though.
Well, this is what he said. Take a look.
The person who actually got the Nobel Prize called me and said, I'm accepting this in honor of you because you really deserved it. That, a very nice thing to do. I didn't say then give it to me, though. I think she might have. She was very nice.
Which was very good of him. But anyway, he was no prize, but still winning plenty of praise, including from Anthony Albanese.
Donald Trump certainly deserves enormous congratulations for the work that he has done. We want to see US leadership in the world, and what we have seen is that on this occasion.
Yeah, and that comment at the end there, Paul, is interesting. He's using this as an example to say we want to see US leadership in the world, which is not necessarily what some of the MAGA base always want.
No, we're trying to keep them in our region. You have Richard Marles going over to meet JD Vance, the kind of MAGA foreign affairs spokesman, to say, remember how important the Indo-Pacific is, you know, to use a Howard-era line, we are your sheriff in the region, stick with it, don't retreat. The rules-based order is in terrible state, partly due to the US's actions, but don't worsen that, stick with it.
I think we're coming up to just a really interesting week. It's only really a week now until Anthony Albanese goes to the White House. It's obviously going to be a really tense moment of will it go well, will it go poorly, how best to manage this, how best to get across our aims but not get in Donald Trump's firing line. I'm going to be really interested to see how the opposition manage this. They've been very strident, at least officially, from the Foreign Affairs spokesperson, other Conservatives who are very much pushing for Australia to be in lockstep with the US on all issues. But I think we can see from polling, from election results, that Australians don't necessarily want the Australian government to be in lockstep with a Trump presidency or what they're seeing from the White House. So I think both how the government play this trip and how the opposition play this trip is going to be really interesting.
Well, it's a good segue to bring in our guest. Time now to talk to the Shadow Communications Minister, Melissa McIntosh. To take us there, here was Donald Trump on his conversation with the Israeli Prime Minister.
I spoke to Bibi Netanyahu just a little while ago. He called. He said, I can't believe it. He said, everybody's liking me now. Meaning him. He said, I said, more importantly, they're loving Israel again. And they really are. I said, Israel cannot fight the world, Bibi. They can't fight the world. And he understands that very well.
Melissa McIntosh, welcome to the program.
Thank you, David.
As Donald Trump said there, Israel can't fight the world. Do you agree the global pressure on Israel did play a role in this outcome?
I think the credit really has to go to Trump, and I find it quite extraordinary but pretty typical of Labor to be hoodwinking, as they do, Australians to claim some of this. We've got to remember that the US administration was not happy with Australia when we made our declaration and our position. So to come now and say that we are out of step with the rest of the world, Penny Wong, it was in your opening, well, I think they've been out of step with our greatest ally for some time. And now with this US trip coming up, I think they're trying to make some ground on their relationship.
Look, the coalition here has not been putting pressure on Israel for the last 2 years. But again, do you think the pressure globally that was there on Israel has helped lead to this ceasefire?
I think certainly there's been a lot of global effort and concern, and I think there'll be a lot of global celebration when those hostages do come home. And I think that's the moment we're all waiting for now, is to see those families embrace their loved ones. But as I said, certainly global recognition, global pressure, but for Australia specifically, to claim credit is quite an extraordinary position. And we have just had the October 7th. And I think one of your guests mentioned this, and it's right, it may have been Paul, that the government didn't need to make that claim. They could have been quiet about it and just accepted that this is Trump's moment.
Yes, but again, there's been no pressure from the coalition on Israel over the last 2 years. Do you think Benjamin Netanyahu's actions in Gaza have been entirely justified?
It was always going to be about bringing the hostages home. We've got to remember where this began. It was Hamas, a terrorist organisation slaughtering over 1,000 Jewish people. This is where it all started. And, the coalition now is pleased that we've gotten to this stage where it looks like we may have a ceasefire and peace in the Middle East, and that's what we're all cheering for.
Let me just ask you on a two-state solution. Donald Trump has said that he doesn't have a view on a two-state solution. Do you?
The coalition has always had the same position that the government broke away from a two-state solution once the hostages were returned and peace was on its way.
Do you support a two-state solution?
Our position hasn't changed on that. But once the hostages were returned home...
Just to let viewers know, what's the position?
Our position was not with the government when they broke away and wanted Palestine to be recognised prior to the hostages being returned home, prior to there being peace.
But
our position has not.
No,
our
what
position
is your
has
position?
not. That's what I'm saying. Our position has not changed.
So what is it?
Of course, we've always had a two-state solution. Once there was peace and the hostages were returned home.
So it's okay to have a different position.
There's been no change.
No, okay, I understand that. So it's okay to have a different position to Donald Trump, to the US, on the Middle East.
Well, it's up to Donald Trump to have his position, and right now our focus is on the ceasefire. Australia, we haven't changed our position in the coalition. It's the government that changed a very long-standing bipartisan position.
But just to be clear, when it comes to the end game here, it's okay to have a different position to the US when it comes to a two-state solution.
Well, we're our own sovereign country. We can have our own opinions. It doesn't mean we're not standing with our greatest allies. We should very much be in lockstep.
You don't need to be in lockstep on that.
On the broader issues, yes, but on this particular one, we've had our position for a very long time, and
it's a pretty big issue.
I have no indication that it's changing.
Okay, let's move on to the Optus 000 outage last month. Is the coalition trying to blame the government at all for what happened?
David, 4 people have died. They couldn't ring 000. It's not about blaming. It's about doing everything we can as an opposition to make sure this never happens again. The government's number one responsibility is to protect its citizens. And people, when they're in their greatest time of need, at the bare minimum, should be able to pick up the phone and make that call. There was a technical disaster with Optus, but there's also been a regulatory disaster with the government. So we've been working hard over these last week, in particular in Parliament. I suspended standing orders to have an inquiry. I think that is important now, particularly seeing that Optus has $900 million in government contracts has gone to Optus since 2023 outage. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we've reached out our hands to help, and I hope the government continues to work with us because they haven't done so yet.
When you look historically at the Coalition's position, it's always been that the industry should self-regulate. There was a much bigger 000 outage at Telstra when the Coalition was in government back in 2018. Fortunately, no lives lost, but some 1,400 000 calls couldn't get through. There was no move to impose tougher government regulation. And even earlier this year when the government said these regulations would take effect in November, the Coalition didn't suggest it should happen earlier. So what has changed? Are you now saying there does need to be much greater government role in regulating 000?
I'm not one that's for regulating for the sake of regulating, and the telco industry is one of the most heavily regulated industries. And I question whether having the custodian in the Department of Communications would be the most effective thing to do, because it's more regulation over ACMA. But we have to try something. Some of the recommendations I've made is to have a public register so every single Australian can see when there's an outage. Let's lift the fines, because whatever these companies are getting fined right now, it seems to be not enough, because we've just had people die. So I am all for doubling the fine on these telco companies, and I would like to see it listed as critical infrastructure, the 000 network specifically. So it's not just about regulation for regulation's sake. Let's pull every single lever we can to ensure this does not happen again. You've got to remember the government didn't do very much in those first weeks. The minister left the country and went overseas while the crisis was unfolding. And we've been working hard to offer solutions, to asking for an inquiry, making amendments in Parliament, pushing really hard for a public, thorough, independent investigation, not ACMA, the regulator, which is very heavily involved in this.
Is that a Senate inquiry? Are you supporting a Senate inquiry that the Greens are talking about?
Yeah, I'd like to see that get off the ground. We wanted a House inquiry, but if we can get something up in the Senate and we can ask questions around, well, why is Optus getting these big government contracts still after what's been going on? Is the regulation going to prevent another outage?
Optus contracts should be cancelled?
Well, I question how you can get hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts and then get fined potentially hundreds of millions of dollars for failing Australians at the same time. I think most Australians will question whether the ethical nature of that. I would like to see that included in any inquiry through the Parliament.
OK, so a Senate inquiry should also look at government contracts to Optus and whether they should be torn up.
I think Australians would rightly want government contracts to be looked at and whether it's appropriate that big companies that do wrong in such a way as what has happened over these last few weeks actually receive those contracts, yes, of course.
Just to be clear, though, on the outage that happened in September, if Optus itself didn't know on, I think it was the 18th of September, the Thursday, the extent of what had happened, didn't know till the next day, is there anything the sort of tougher regulations we're talking about here would have done to have changed this?
You're right, David. We need to ensure that the regulations that are in place will prevent something like this happening again. Optus didn't know the outage happened, and then there was an email that went to ACMA, the regulator, went to the minister's office and went to the department, and it seems no one could read an email or open an email because they're all claiming they didn't know about it.
That email had incorrect information saying only 10 calls had been affected and everything was rectified.
Well, it doesn't matter if it's 10 calls or if it's 600 calls. When welfare checks are needing to be made, people's lives could still be at risk. The fact that you don't respond to an email is extraordinary. So, we need to ensure whatever is in place is strong enough, robust enough, and actually gets to the bottom of why this happened and stops it happening again.
I want to turn to the challenges facing your party, Melissa McIntosh, after the election earlier this year. One of the things you talked about was changing the culture in the Liberal Party in relation to getting more women in Parliament. You said you were open to the idea of quotas, so did Susan Lee. Is this going anywhere? Is there anything happening since then?
I think I said it will be a continuing revolving door of women if we don't address the culture, and we can have all the quotas in the world, but it wouldn't matter. Culture is so important in the Liberal Party, how we treat each other within the party, how we treat women as they're coming through the ranks. And I would like to see more change. It's not going to happen overnight. I wish I could say to you, since the election, it's all hunky-dory, everything's amazing in the Liberal Party. That wouldn't be telling you the truth. But I have a particular focus, being the Shadow Minister for Women, to do what I can. And I hope the report, when it comes out, the review, points to some of the practical measures we can start putting in place.
You're the member for Lindsay in Western Sydney. I'm just keen for your view on the migration debate that's raging in your party as well. Do you share Andrew Hastie's concern that Australians are feeling like strangers in their home? Or is your immigration spokesman, Paul Sakkal, right when he says we need a more measured debate on immigration?
In some ways, I agree with both of them, and I don't in any way want to shape the migration debate around race. I've got wonderful multicultural community in Western Sydney, and I come from a migrant background as well, as many of us do. But in Western Sydney, we do feel the strains of population growth. I have a public hospital right in my electorate that is bursting at the seams, and every one of your viewers would know how hard it is. Infrastructure pressures on our roads. We have an international airport coming in, and housing inaffordability. So that part of the debate is very real, but it is just one part of the debate. But we do have a beautiful multicultural community at the same time.
You don't feel like a stranger?
No, I think Western Sydney, where I am, is the best place in the country, and it is built on all sorts of people coming here to make a better life for their family. And I think everyone should feel always at home in Australia.
Just a final question on this. I mean, there are very different views in your party on migration, on climate, on the role of government in supporting manufacturing and so on. There is some talk about whether the Liberal Party can hold together. What do you think? Is there any potential that the Liberal Party itself splits?
We have to hold it together, and I think the last week proved that when we focus on policy and focus on holding the government to account, we can make some way. And, you know, I feel strongly about that. We wouldn't have gotten anywhere with Optus if we weren't focused on the government, not ourselves. We have our beliefs and our values, and I think we don't need to go much deeper than remembering what they are. And we have always had moderates in the party, very conservative people in the party. And if we can just work through our differences, I think the future, I could be a little bit optimistic here, but I feel like the media might be a bit more focused on this issue than us. The future is bright for the Liberal Party.
All right, Melissa McIntosh, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, David.
We are going to come back to those the Optus 000 outage and how that played out in Parliament during the week. Let's get back to the panel, though. Paul Sakkal, Melissa, Clarke, Waleed Aly. Just on the Liberal Party, yes, we're focused on it, but let's be honest, it's not just the media. It's, well, Paul, as you well know, it's plenty of Liberals who are talking about this. That bigger question, though, about whether the party splits. It's a conversation that I've been picking up. I know others have as well from Liberals. One former minister said to me during the week, it's inevitable they're going to split. Now, I don't know if that's a widespread view. What do you think? Yeah,
there is chatter about it. I should say all the people talking about it don't have plans to do so.
No.
But people are speaking about it as something that might have to happen over the next few years if the split can't be resolved. Scott Morrison, after the 2022 election, confided in some of his very close colleagues to say that given the rise of the National Party and very, very different kinds of opinions among voters in cosmopolitan areas compared to outer suburban areas, that there would have to be a city-based Liberal Party. Now, on the other side, people like Matt Canavan would like to see the LNP morphed into a more populist party. We have a populist party already. It's called One Nation. It has a kind of ceiling on its vote, usually at elections, although it's polling very well now. Pauline Hanson is a very well-known figure. She's tried to recruit Barnaby Joyce. She tried to recruit Jacinta Price. So there is a vehicle there. And I think it was a really interesting column, sorry to ramble on here, by Peter Harcher yesterday, which I think most clearly explained what Andrew Hastie's thinking is at the moment. And effectively it said that Hastie is looking at the world, observing these very severe democratic forces that have been unleashed in the last 10 years. You see the rise of populists in the US, in Europe, and majoritarian movements in India and Indonesia and Hungary and various other places. And Hastie wants to position himself to be the person who rides that wave if it comes to Australia. But we have a very different voting system, preferential system, and it's unclear if that wave will come here.
It's fascinating sort of thing to wargame or hypothesise, isn't it? How does this movement on the right of the Liberal Party realign with other forces on the right? And where do those in the moderate trying to win back the city seats and the Teal movement, how do they realign? But Mel, is anything likely to happen, or are the practical difficulties too hard?
Look, I think the issues with splitting are too great. You look at a split in a party that couldn't be a party of government. We have seen it before in the 50s, the ALP and DLP. It kept them out of government for 20 years. I think that is definitely in minds, as is the fact that the further right of the Liberal Party is already littered with several minor parties trying to make this move. We look at Family First's attempt to occupy some of this space. We look at Cory Bernardi trying to break away with the Australian Conservatives. We look at the very crowded field of One Nation, Qatar Australia's party, whatever Clive Palmer is up to at any given time, shooters, farmers and fishers. Like, there is already a very fractured space there, and you risk just becoming another one of many non-government options to choose from. So then that leaves, all right, how do we sort this out? How do we stay together as a Liberal Party? And the versions that I see are either we need to find a compromise that everyone can live with, and that seems to be very unpalatable because they've tried that before. That's how we got a nuclear policy. That was a way for people to say, OK, we can have net zero, but we don't actually have to do anything about transforming the electricity grid to renewables.
But that gets harder.
So that gets harder. So then there's the, well, do we just need to duke it out and someone needs to lose? But the problem with that is we've seen quite a bit over the last 10 years, I would argue, of people losing the argument in the Liberal Party room and refusing to accept that loss. And I think Tony Abbott is probably one who's helped exemplify that attitude in the party of, even if we lose on the numbers in the party room, we're going to keep fighting for our view. And that's why we end up in this position where it's constant internal turmoil. Just briefly, there was a comment from Alex Hawke this week, which I think was quite telling, that he is in this camp of, we need to have a compromise and the losers of the argument need to accept it. He had a bit of a whack on the way, saying that how you accept a policy loss is a mark on your character.
Well, in a sense, he would say that because he wants them to agree with him.
Because he wants them to agree.
What do you think more broadly, Waleed, about this realignment moment? Are there pros rather than cons in a split, or is it all bad news?
The split could only work if, rather than becoming one of the constellation of parties that are not parties of government, you can actually pull together something that has serious gravitational pull. So if you could hoover up the Nats, if you could hoover up anyone who might be flirting with One Nation, Bob Katter eventually is going to leave Parliament at some point, that seat potentially. So if you can pull it together in that way, then it works. I take Paul's point about our system of government, our electoral system. The paradigm case is reform in the UK, right? So what Reform is doing now in outpolling the Tories have lost, I think, another 13, 14% of their vote from the last election, which was already terrible, right? But that works because it's a first-past-the-post system. So you do have to overcome that element of it. The problem is there is no easy way to reconcile this within the coalition, because this goes back, I think, to the Howard era. That conservative politics in Australia, actually around the world, but in Australia, has been built on a contradiction for 25 years, which is liberal economics and illiberal cultural politics, right? And those two things can hold for a certain period of time, but eventually events and political moods evolve to a point where that contradiction starts to split apart. It's split apart in America, which has resulted in the magnification of the Republican Party. It's split apart in the UK, and it's now splitting apart here, which leads to civil war that's interminable.
Often on the issue of migration as well, which, you know, we need economically, but it for social conservatives is creating a problem. So it's a good point.
But the signs were early. Remember back in the days of the banking, was it the Banking Commission, and George Christensen was off running a totally different line to the way that the coalition wanted to run it, which was much more business friendly.
But I think we also... you go.
Thanks, Phil. Just worth noting, we don't have the same issues with illegal migration that the UK has.
Correct, yeah.
Not even close. And just, you mentioned Tony Abbott, Mel, earlier. There's a lot of people are reading into a comment he gave in a speech at the CPAC conference last week, where he said to a group of people who were shouting at him from the crowd, yelling Pauline Hanson's name and effectively saying the Liberal Party is a moribund outfit. He said to them, give us one last chance to prove you can trust us. One last chance. So people like Abbott who want to see the party reform are, if you read into that comment, almost giving up themselves.
It's interesting. I just want to play this before we move on from Andrew Hastie, who did lay low through the week, but he appeared yesterday to point out that he's been laying low.
I was silent all week. I didn't do any media out of respect for Susan, so any of the disunity that came through the media was done by my opponents, so they can answer for that. I gave her clear out.
It's got nothing to do with him. No, all these problems this week since he quit the front bench. No, it's not his fault. Look, I want to move on to Optus. We just heard there from Melissa McIntosh about the need for regulation, not for regulation's sake, but clearly a need to do something more here in the 000 space. Waleed, is that obvious?
Yeah, I think there is a need for more to be done, and I think the real question is the regulation stuff. The theatre this week has been about emails being sent to the wrong place and at the wrong time and with the wrong information and all that sort of stuff. Important.
Yep.
But
embarrassing.
But. Yeah, sure, especially for a communications company and a communications department. But what didn't come up in that interview, which surprised me, was the Bean review. So we've been through this, right? There were outages in 2023, almost exactly 2 years ago.
Yeah.
You then have a review that comes out of ACMA and it recommends a couple of things. One of the things that, actually several things, one of the things it recommends is this custodian. Why? Because this is an impossibly complicated system you're talking about that involves telcos, it involves different telcos having to work together. It involves devices, right? The different devices that are there and the failures that they can have, all this sort of stuff. So you need someone that's coordinating all this. Custodian, what a beautiful word to try to have carriage of this essential service. The government agrees. They say they want to look into it, they agree. Now they're rushing in legislation, now, to try to... sorry, this is 18 months ago. Now, I gather that's not come up in the interview you just had there because it's a regulatory idea that doesn't come naturally to Libs. That's probably why it hasn't come up, but that is the most obvious line of attack, it seems to me. The one area, though, where I think they're absolutely on it is the idea of setting up some kind of Senate committee. I think it should be parliamentary, actually.
But if for no other reason, Mel, but to see Optus in the dock publicly. Yes, there are various inquiries underway, but a Senate inquiry would let us all see how they answer all these questions. Because, I mean, yes, there are questions about regulation and so on, but at the heart of it, this is Optus's failure.
And look, the government has been pressing that point to say don't let Optus off the hook by focusing on us. There is clearly a regulatory issue to address, but Optus clearly has issues to address. They're pointing to, well, there's human failure in the system and we need to address that. This is not the first time they've had failure in the system, so it is upon them as a corporate entity to make sure that that doesn't happen. And despite initially seeing from the CEO, when we had some of the Singtel representatives out, as a bit of a show of support, I think, for him, it's been very quiet from Optus in the last couple of days, and I think that's telling too.
And there is a concern in the government that I've picked up that Singtel isn't all that focused on Optus, that they might be simply trying to prepare it for sale, and part of that is a problem, and they've got different sections in different parts of the world that deal with customer calls, that deal with the network and so on. So it's a messy situation. Paul, as the opposition, they did spend a couple of days in Parliament, and of course estimates going after the government on this, then they dropped it on the final day of Parliament. Did they get very far, do you think?
Yeah, it was they argue, the opposition privately argues that the reason they focus on Optus for 2 whole days was because they have this kind of new strategy of weakest in the herd among the ministry. They try and expose a newer, less experienced minister. They went Sam Ray, the new aged care minister, a few weeks ago. He stood up pretty well. And they went Annika Wells this week for 2 whole days with no questions on anything else, which is quite...
She looked pretty untroubled, though, you got to say.
I think she had a couple of moments that were questionable. I think her argument is that the government doesn't need to make a public apology because this is a private firm that's mucked up. But I think if you ask an average Australian, and I was a layperson on 000 until this week, I should say, I think most Australians would assume that there is some strong government oversight or government enmeshment in the 000 system, and that if an outage occurs at a key telco, they have immediate knowledge of that. I acknowledge the the email issue was not an unbelievable revelation, but it does point to this quite ludicrous situation where the government and the telco doesn't even know how to communicate when there is an outage.
How do we talk when the system's gone down?
And all these new regulations that we're now going to bring in just seem like common sense, real-time reporting, a government oversight system to know
You're right.
how this
People would say, why aren't we doing this already?
Yeah.
Look, I want to finally get to the issue of these so-called ISIS brides that two women, 4 kids that have returned. What's been interesting, though, is the government's determination to stress that it has not assisted, not helped. They're entitled to return, that's happened, but no help, no assistance. And we only actually had confirmation that 2 of the kids had to be issued passports through citizenship by descent from a public servant.
In relation to the cohort that we're discussing, we processed 2 applications.
So, Mel, the public servant's having to clarify what the government wouldn't.
It's becoming a bit of a repeat process, Spearsy. I mean, we're seeing this a lot from the government that declines to give information about critical events or information on the basis that, oh, there's national security or, oh, there's privacy, so I'm just not going to discuss that. Yet, lo and behold, there's not actually a national security or a privacy provision that prevents them from giving basic facts, anonymised, not specific facts that then public servants have to deliver at estimates. Now, I suspect the government doesn't want any discussion on this issue and other similar ones because it is worried about social cohesion, it's worried about the reaction, but in many ways it makes it look worse because it looks like it is trying to obscure what is actually going on.
Just quickly, it's quite a contrast to a few years ago when the government did mount classified operation to extract women and kids from one of those camps in Syria. This time it's just been, no, nothing to do with us. Why the change here, Waleed?
As in, why the rhetorical change?
Yeah, why, well, not just rhetorical, but why was there a willingness to go in and help extract? But this time it's like, no, we've got nothing to do here. We're not helping.
Well, part of it, I think, is just the way this happened. These are people who smuggled themselves out of Syria and then got to Lebanon. So the assistance that they... Sorry, that's the wrong word to use, isn't it?
Assistance. Yes, assistance is not assistance. Not assistance.
I think it's what the government wants you to be really clear on.
I apologise to the nation. So they were given passports.
Yep.
Not assisted.
Not assisted. Not assisted. Okay. Someone signed a form.
Yeah, so in some ways there was just no need. I mean, in these particular cases. If you're then talking about, well, a much bigger program that affects more people, well, if they're not prepared to talk about this, and they don't want this to become a public conversation, imagine how big a public conversation that would have to be.
Yeah.
I just can't see. It's not a thing they want to bite off at the moment.
No, that's certainly true. And I think there's also a view that the situation in Syria has changed, that it is perhaps easier
the security
to get yourself out.
Is certainly a different arrangement.
And we heard in estimates there's an expectation more will be coming. So we'll stand by for not assistance, but more returns. All right. Our panel, Waleed Aly, Melissa Clarke and Paul Sakkal, back shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer large for the New Daily. I'm talking pictures this morning with Jack the Insider, columnist for the Australian, and a very warm welcome.
Great to be here, Mike.
Jack, it's been a long time coming, but hopefully we'll get some concrete peace in the Middle East. And Donald Trump seems to be able to pull this off.
Seems to have pulled it off so far, so good. A lovely cartoon here from Johannes Leek.
Yep.
Light at the end of the tunnel for the hostages.
Let's hope that's not an oncoming train. Yeah. Let's keep all fingers crossed. Really, the United States is the only one that could have pulled this off.
Yeah, exactly right.
A beautiful David Rowe, the Donald's in the details. You can pay me later with Netanyahu and Hamas here.
Didn't even pay the tip. He's left us with the bill again, hasn't he?
We can split it. And the hostages are on the bill.
Yes, indeed.
Very poignant. I found Matt Golding's cartoon to be absolutely superb. People around the world are bracing for the confronting reality of having to give Donald Trump some credit.
Yeah, well, credit where it's due.
Yeah.
You know, Nobel Peace Prize, not this year, which will frustrate the Donald, but maybe one next year.
Jack, when it comes to ensuring a 000 service, it seems that Optus has made the wrong call.
Well, they're flat out sending an email at the moment.
Yeah.
And this is, of course, channeling the great John Clarke and Brian Doran days.
Yes.
We're a telco, Brian. We do communications. How's that going, the communications with the Department of Communications? Not well, Brian.
You know, when you've got a channel Clarke and Door that things are bat crazy.
Things have got beyond satire, Mike. Yeah.
Matt Bissett-Johnson has drawn this. You can take this piggy to the bank, I think. Optus is sick. Someone call 000.
Someone call 000. Yeah. Will you get through?
Yeah. Peter Brolman here is harking back to a more reliable form of messaging, Jack.
Well, yes. He's got the carrier pigeon out. OK, is the public apology for sending the 000 warning to the wrong email address typed out?
Yes.
Release the carrier pigeon.
Yeah. I think you could guarantee it'd get there, right?
Well, it'd probably just fly out the window and fly straight back in.
Annika Wells was put under considerable pressure this week in Question Time, sustaining quite a number of questions about what was going on.
Who knew what, when, and of course her office received an email from Optus. But,
there's a couple of calls here have gone astray, sort of nature.
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it.
It's all in hand.
It's all good.
Now, she should be under a lot of pressure over gaming and betting because they've done nothing about that.
It seems, Jack, that Susan Lee, the opposition leader, is taking a slow and steady approach to her leadership, but she suffered a bit of a hasty decision.
Hasty retreat.
And Brett Lethbridge has Andrew Hastie beating a hasty retreat.
Hasty retreat in the tank, blown a big hole in the wall, and he's off to the back bench.
He's off to the back bench. It's always an awkward look when they first move to the back bench because it's the juxtaposition between the leader and, of course, thankfully they placed him almost in line.
But right up the back.
Right up the back. You couldn't get any backer on the back bench.
No.
That is the back bench. David Rowe has picked up on what Jacinta Price called the clown show.
Clown show, yes.
For your information, it says this clown show must end as she's delivering the message via a wah.
There's a few up the back there just to help the comedy along. Look, I just think let's leave these people to their own pain, Mike.
With cost of claims on the rise, climate change seems to have removed the shore from insurance.
Yes, we're seeing this impact on housing premiums, and some places cannot be insured at all.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a growing number, yeah.
Top shelf from Matt Golding. This is my extreme climate disaster take on the famous Dorothy McKellar poem. It's called My Uninsurable Country.
I love my uninsurable country.
Yeah. I love an uninsurable country, a land of fiscal strain, of rugged mountainous debt, of doubt and monetary pain.
I thought you were going to go with rain there, but never mind.
It's been a great pleasure unpicking events this week. I'll let you do the honours.
On you, Mike. And it's back to you, Spearsy.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Mike. Time for some final observations. Quick one from me. The National Anti-Corruption Commission has said earlier in the year it wasn't aware of its chair, Paul Brereton, doing any ongoing duties for defence, where he's been a reservist for many years. It Senate estimates during the week, though, and this was based on the reporting of our colleague Olivia Casely, that he's actually consulted for the Inspector General of Defence 11 times. It's a little unclear whether the Commission was aware of all of this. The Prime Minister sidestepped largely a question on it, so that's an interesting one to watch. Waleed.
One of the through lines in our conversations has been transparency in the ISIS brides, even with the Optus situation. For that reason, let's keep an eye on new FOI legislation that the government is trying to get through that would require a release to consider not only whether it's in the public interest, but also effective government. And what that means, it means less disclosure, almost certainly, but most relevantly, perhaps look at what the coalition does with that. Because as a party of government, it would have every reason to want to restrict that. As an opposition looking for a fight to pick with the government, it would have every reason not to support this legislation. But either way, it's very significant.
No, that's a good one. Mel.
Obviously, we have Anthony Albanese heading to the White House soon. It's putting a bit more attention on the fact we don't have a US ambassador to Australia. We haven't had since November when Caroline Kennedy left. So there's a growing expectation that Donald Trump is getting very close to announcing a new ambassador. And the very strong chatter, although I will preface this by saying it is very much chatter, but the chatter is he wants someone from Hollywood. He wants someone from the West Coast to be the next ambassador to Australia. And there are some notable public supporters of Donald Trump whose names are now being thrown around as possible candidates.
Drum roll. Here we go.
They include Mel Gibson and Sylvester Stallone and even John Voight. So just keep an eye out.
I love this story. That's a good shout. All right, Paul.
That is a very scoopy final observation. Mine's much more boring. Andrew Hastie's been talking a lot about reindustrialising the country, but industry policy in an old school sense is well and truly back. We saw a $600 million bailout for a copper smelter during the week. It's not the first in recent years, and it won't be the last. And these bailouts used to largely be about protecting jobs. Labor leans into these deals because they are a union-based party. But there's now a whole new sovereignty argument put on them. I know that word can be overused, but China is flooding the world with cheap nickel, cheap copper, trying to kill off any other country's capacity to do critical minerals production. The US wants us to be in this game. They want to see us support these industries. It's crucial to Albanese's trip to the White House, so expect to see much more.
Industry support is back. All right, thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Finally, Labor couldn't resist a dig at Andrew Hastie as he took that seat up on the backbench. But look, he didn't look all that unhappy sitting up there next to Tony Passon. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
We've got the opposition leader punishing the member for Canning the harshest way she knows by making him sit next to the member for Barker.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.